Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation and last and final part to Complicated Creation. This will be the second half of Chapter 13. It's been raining for 3 days. Aizawa is in the dorms, currently seated at the kitchen island with a mug of coffee that is not helping his exhaustion, nor his pounding headache, but he can at least pretend it is keeping things from getting worse. Class is subdued at the moment. He knows it's only time before someone starts something, and they'll forget he's keeping an eye on them long enough to make a mess or start a fight. So he'll be grateful for the quiet while it lasts. Everyone's gathered in the main lounge because UA is conserving as much power as possible. School itself is out. Those generators have been turned to putting power back into the grid to support the surrounding areas most hurt by the outages. Kaminari's working with Higari, channeling his own powers into the reserves, keeping himself from overloading while the storm rages on. Lightning strikes and thunder crashes, bright enough to fill the room even in midday, loud enough to shake the windows. Everyone flinches, but it's muted. They're all numb to it at this point. It's been 3 days of lightning and rain across 2/3 of Honshu, and if it doesn't let up soon, they're going to have flooding to worry about on top of the lightning damage. As it is, 8 people are dead, 2 dozen more are injured, and the rain is the only thing that has kept fires to a minimum. Everywhere affected is shut down, not from the rain, which is bad, but everyone knows how to handle rain, but because the lightning will not stop and seems to ignore all laws of nature and physics, ignoring, for example, lightning rods specifically designed to protect buildings, or even the tallest structure in the area, to strike randomly. Everyone is scrambling to repair generators, carpools are being run to try to support essential workers and services, but it's still hard going. Everyone has theories about why. Someone's quirk on a rampage is an easy guess, of course, but whoever is responsible is yet to claim responsibility, yet to be seen. Shota suspects they cannot be seen. The storm is a blessing and a curse. No one braves going outside unnecessarily, and so calls for heroes have been for rescues and support work, but Shota can't go on patrol. He has kids to look after, and it's a stupid risk, everyone has told him, when it seems like the lightning aims at people. It'd be one thing if he knew where Deku was, or even had an idea of where to look, but the truth is, he didn't have time to get a read on the kid, not enough of one. Not to properly learn his bolt holes and his habits, not to figure out where he'd go to ground. And that's forgetting the fact that all of fucking Japan could be his hiding place. And Shota thinks bitterly, didn't he mention ending up in France or something at some point? The truth is, Deku could be anywhere, and as desperately as Shota wants to find him, drag him back to UA, and tell him everything is fine, everyone is safe, he didn't have to run. He has 20 students who are looking at him to keep them safe, too. "Can you open this?" Hitoshi asks, standing across from him and holding out a bag of chips. Shota squints. "Are you still running bets on getting me to use my new quirk?" "No." "But Sensei," Hitoshi manages to be both sing-song and deadpan at the same time. Shota can hear smothered laughter coming from the couches, as they no doubt have an audience. "How will you learn how to use it if you don't practice?" He looks at his smooth, shiny silver nails. He's been complimented on his nail polish several times now. It's getting old quick. "When I have a reliable way to retract them, or it won't inconvenience me for an entire day cutting and filing them down, then I will practice. We have more important things to focus on." "I don't know." Hitoshi takes his mug away, and Shota doesn't even argue. It's cold, and his son empties it in the sink and pours him a new cup without comment, sliding it back into Shota's waiting hands before pouring a mug for himself. "If this keeps up, we're not going to have much else to do." Nezu's arranging for a lesson schedule and a teacher rotation. Shota counters, but he knows that isn't quite what Hitoshi means either. He takes a seat across the island and sits, and Shota knows they're not exactly mirror images of one another, but he also knows there's enough resemblance that Hizashi would probably comment if he was here. "Do you think this is because of Deku?" Hitoshi asks, after they've both made a dent in their beverage of choice. In the sitting area around the television, there's an argument about proper fort building and the necessity of such for optimal scary movie viewing. Ashido is leading the charge, and Shota doesn't even consider stopping them. "I don't know," he admits, because Hitoshi will wait forever for an answer and never forget that he's asked it. You can't outweight him, or even think you've talked him into forgetting or being distracted. Directness is the only thing that works. I have my suspicions. They say he killed all for one, Hitoshi puts forward. Shota narrows his eyes. They say that, do they? He wonders who's opened their big damn mouth. No one was supposed to know that information until they were ready to let it go public, and especially not during a storm, where idiots on the press would always try to turn something into a story trademarked. Hitoshi nods over the lip of his mug. You know how kids on the internet are. He shrugs, one-shouldered. And fuck, because this is Satoshi's way of telling him he's missed something. Because even Nezu can overlook the difference between a random fad and an actual bit of real information that hits whatever social media platform is popular that week. Hizashi keeps up with them for his radio and hero work, but Shota's never had the attention span for any of them. He uses Instagram because he can post photos of the cats and no one needs to know who he is. Well, let me know if they say anything else noteworthy, he asks, a nod over his cup in acknowledgement that in this his son is miles ahead of him. And if anyone sees him. Nothing official. No, Shota sighs. And with this storm, we're limited. Hitoshi nods and stares at his mug. It's one he brought from home, one they'd given him 2 birthdays ago. It was originally thermal reactive, black with the white outline of a cat that had raised middle fingers on his paws when the mug was warm. Absolutely ridiculous, and Ida had gasped when he had seen it, and been equally scandalized when Shota had suggested that since a cat's paw did not, by any real judgment, have a middle finger, the mug wasn't offensive unless you were anthropomorphizing the cat and suggesting it understood the gesture to make it. That had derailed into a conversation from several of his class, first suggesting that Ida was a furry, to much confused protests. Then they realized half their class didn't know what a furry was, and Shota had left them to it, and had gone to get drinks with Hizashi before he tendered his resignation. He'd never been prepared to have dorm duty. The mug's been through the dishwasher a few times too many, and so the paws are a permanent fixture. It's not your fault, Hitoshi says, while the windows rattle, the thunder almost omnipresent now. Deku, you can't... You've said it before. You can't help someone who doesn't want to be helped, and he did a lot to try. Hitoshi's keeping his voice down, maybe because he doesn't want his classmates to hear them talking about Deku, maybe because he gets personal when he adds, I know how hard it is, and I know you did your best, and I think he does, too. I don't know what happened, but I hope he'll come back. I promised to take him to that cat cafe we like, the one with the boba. Hitoshi had done his best to make Deku feel welcomed, and Shota's been so self-absorbed, he's barely had the time to thank him when they'd literally thrown Deku into Hitoshi's life without even a word of warning. I should thank you, he admits, watching as Hitoshi's eyes snap up to meet his. I've been so preoccupied with everyone, but you've gone out of your way to welcome Deku, without any warning. I noticed, even if I didn't. Sensei. Tokiyami is one of the only members of his class who can regularly sneak up on Shota, and the worst part is that he very rarely means to, and Shota has to do his best to never appear spooked or he'll lose his edge. Yes. He turns in his seat to look at his student, who had been spending most of the early evening reading in the corner, taking advantage of the lights in the main room instead of siphoning energy to his personal dorm. What is it? Shota's surprised at the pause. Tokiyami does not, as a rule, speak to him until he has formulated exactly what it is he wants to say, and how he wants to say it. Apologies, Sensei. Dark Shadow wished to speak to you. Another surprise, but one that this time makes Shota pause. Dark Shadow. The quirk appears from Tokiyami's collar. Something's coming, it says, beady eyes staring straight into Shota, sharp and almost familiar. Think you want to be outside for this? Shota slides off the stool instantly, but something makes him pause. Dark Shadow, he says, while the shadow, the quirk, the thing he has always thought of as simply being an extension of Tokiyami's subconscious and not, in any way, his own thing, looks at him with intelligent eyes. The question dies at the tip of his tongue. What is he supposed to ask? Are you a spirit? Except, why the hell not? Are you a spirit like the ones Deku can see? Hitoshi asks, reading Shota's mind. What do you think? Dark Shadow cackles and caws, and then disappears into Tokiyami's form once more. The student bows slightly. Apologies, Sensei. He would not tell me what this was about at all. It's fine. The warning hadn't been urgent, or even sounded threatening. It had been amused, like the quirk, spirit, creature was laughing at them. Ida, Shota calls as he heads to the door. Keep everyone downstairs. I'm stepping out for a moment. Yes, Sensei. He trades his house slippers for shoes and heads outside where everything is gray, dull, and overcast. The sun is already beginning to set, but the thick clouds make it feel like hours later. They only have one lamp directly at the dorm stairs lit, everything else dark to conserve power. There is no one to be seen, no traffic to be heard, just the roll of thunder, the crash of lightning, and the sheeting rain. Shota waits. Thunder rolls overhead, rumbling deep enough to be felt in his bones, and sparks gather around the stones of the quad. Shota doesn't hesitate as he slides his heels together and crouches down just in case. This is foolish and dangerous. He knows he's being foolhardy, but something is telling him to wait, not to run inside. He's rewarded by a dragon landing heavily on the front quad. A dragon. A dragon. It is silver and white, and he wonders if this means it is Ares' dragon by description, but it really does not matter because Deku is on its back. The dragon's claws are digging furrows into the stone underneath it, but Shota doesn't care. He's already running before Deku can take off again. Aizawa. And the kid sounds surprised that he's here, that he's come out, that Shota's reaching up and dragging him off the back of a fucking dragon. He will deal with that fact later. He will deal with a lot of this later. And holding him by the shoulders in the rain and staring him down to make sure he's all right. Deku does not look all right. Shota swallows down a dozen questions and demands and the burning need to just pick Deku up and carry him bodily inside, but it's hard. He can't get this wrong. He can't fuck this up again. Welcome back, he says, trying to put everything he wants to say into those words and into the grip on Deku's shoulders. I wish you hadn't run off. Deku flinches, and Shota curses himself because he's so fucking bad at this, and that wasn't what he meant. I'm sorry, problem child. I shouldn't have let them drag you into any of that. Are you all right? Deku shocks the fuck out of him when he shakes his head. It shocks Shota enough that he drops to his knees and ignores the rain soaking his clothes and hair, and the stares they are probably receiving from his students through the large bay windows because this is the first time Deku's not shrugged something off as fine. Problem child. What? I almost drowned, Deku says, voice raw. And I think I bruised my ribs. And I haven't eaten in 3 days. And I haven't slept and I'm so cold. The kid's clothing is soaked through and freezing, and when Shota grabs Deku's hands, they feel like ice. Even in this gray, dim light, the scar on Deku's cheek stands out in sharp relief, and his lips look, upon closer inspection, bluish, as his teeth chatter. Shota gives up on doing things slowly once more. Deku's going to have to tolerate a bit of speed and efficacy right now. He scoops the kid up in one motion that is still too fucking easy, and then glares at the spirit in front of him. I'm taking him inside. You had better not bother him, he declares, having no goddamn clue if they're actually a friend at the moment, or just a foe waiting for a shot at the kid. The dragon nods. I will guard this place for him, he intones in a voice that sounds like a crash of thunder, and lightning, and the roar of the waves. For him is good, and so is guard, but Shota is still suspicious of spirits and how they work, and he's learned enough to pay attention to those suspicions now. He doesn't think that the way the dragon sounds is a coincidence, for example. Are you the one responsible for this storm? There's a pause. The dragon blinks. It attempts to look baleful. No, it is the epoch of my brother's rebirth. He is gathering his power once more. Well, tell him to tone it down. Shota has no idea where this is coming from, where this gibbering insanity of yelling at a goddamn dragon is coming from, but he hasn't slept properly in 3 days, and Deku is curled in his arms and holding on, not fighting it, shivering. He's going to have so much to explain because there's no fucking way his kids aren't watching this, and so he puts just every ounce of his years of teaching into his voice as he continues. He needs to tone it down. People are getting hurt, and if your lot flood this place, I'll find some way to make you pay for the damages. The dragon stares at him, head pulled back in front before he laughs out loud. You will be an excellent guardian, he tells Shota like he's passed some sort of test. You will keep him safe. I sure as hell plan to, but it'd be easier if your lot would leave him the hell alone. I will ensure he has time to rest. The dragon nods and curls into a pose that Shota feels like he's seen on a million frescoes through his life and never once considered how odd that might look in real life, in 3 dimensions. I will ask Ryujin to quiet his efforts. The rumble of thunder in the distance stops. Shota decides to take that as a win before something bad happens, like he gets punted across the quad by a dragon tail because he's run his mouth off. He'd always thought dragons were gods, and he's absolutely not going to think about that too hard. The dragon bows at him, and then starts to fade from sight. He is actually a bit relieved. As nice as seeing physical proof that they're not all crazy is, they can probably all do without being in the presence of something as long as a football field in front of the school. Of course, the claw marks remain. Of course they do. Fuck, but they need another long conversation about all this and how the spirits are now physical, don't they? Later. It can be done later. Deku comes first. Shota retreats back inside the dorms, and of course his class is absolutely pretending not to hover as he gets inside. Sensei! They cry as a group the moment the door closes behind him. At least they don't swarm. If he gives orders now, he can keep them from asking too many questions. He flares his quirk for effect, and to hopefully tell Tamamo to return, in case she hasn't yet. Yaoyorozu, can you make a heating blanket? He takes off his wet shoes, but the rest is going to have to just drip for now. Shinso, we'll need to borrow a change of clothes. Clear office space on the couch, one of you. Ida, call recovery girl, we're going to need her here. And when that's done, call Principal Nezu. Tell him I need Deku's emergency bag. Chio is staying with Eri and Mirio in the 3rd-year dorm, but one of the material manipulation students will be able to tunnel her here safely. Nezu has all of his secret tunnels and who knows what else, and Shota knows Deku's backpack has been prepped as his getaway bag since they came to UA. Those paper prayers are going to be important now. He's not going to leave everything to a dragon. As for the rest of you, give us some space. Shinso, you're with me. They get Deku into the bathroom and out of his wet clothes. Shota ducks out to let Hitoshi help with that because he doesn't want to end up walking over a trigger on the kid without knowing it, using the time to quickly strip out of his own soaked things and into his spares. Then they bundle Deku onto the couch with blankets, including a heating blanket, thank everything for Yaoyorozu's abilities coming through once more, and Shota gets a good look at the aforementioned bruised ribs. How'd you do this one, problem child? He asks while they get Deku comfortable and wait for Chio to arrive. Dragon claws. They're bad at judging pressure, I think. Deku winces. It honestly didn't hurt at first, but I think that maybe that was the adrenaline. Dude, so that really was a dragon outside? That's so manly. There's no such thing as dragons. Tell that to Ryuku. That's different. Quiet, please, all of you, and give us some space, Shota reminds his class, who are hovering. Someone pushes into the crowd anyway and hands him a thermos with a lid. Shota looks up into Bakugo's scowling face. Tea, he barks out, like it's an offense to admit it, instantly stepping back. Thank you. Shota presses it into Deku, shaking hands, then gives the rest of the room a significant look. His students scatter, even if there's only so far they can go while remaining on the main floor. Still, it affords Deku some privacy. Recovery girl will be here soon, he tells him, crouched on the floor so he's at Deku's eye level. You said you almost drowned. When was that? What happened? Deku flushes. I fell off Mizuchi and into the sea to find Ryujin, and that was actually very stupid in hindsight. He looks up over Shota's shoulder, eyes unfocused. I know, I wasn't thinking right, it was stupid. Shota keeps his expression neutral because he almost wants to smile at the aggrieved tone, and yet he'd fallen into the sea was hardly worth of humor. I take it Talmomonome is giving you a scolding. She's fussing. It's not like I wanted to fall. I was just... He coughs, wincing. It was dumb. Shota's not even sure how else he could reply, so he settles for, at least you know not to repeat that. Hitoshi's obviously listening, because Shota hears him snicker. It drags a weak grin from Deku as well, and Shota brushes his still damp hair back out of his eyes. You had me worried, he admits, now that they have at least some space and Deku's looking a little less like death. You didn't need to run. It was all right. We're all safe. You gave Ragdoll her quirk back. Nothing was your fault. Deku nods, but there's still tension in his small frame. I made a mess of things, though, and now you... He looks at Shota's new, shiny quirk nails. That is my fault. Why do I think it was an accident that you're blaming yourself for? Shota wiggles his fingers. I can live with this. So can the rest who were affected. It's a change, and it's going to take some getting used to, but we're all capable of dealing with change, problem child. Deku flinches and looks away. It isn't... it is you, but it's not just you. It's your spirits, He swallows. All for one. His spirit was Ryujin, the dragon, and he... Deku closes his eyes and shudders. It was awful. Shota almost asks how. Then he remembers this is the kid who took the hanging body spider hair woman, lion-faced, googly-eyed giant spider thing, and a river of disembodied eyeballs without flinching. He does not, in fact, need to find out what Deku thinks of as awful at this exact moment in time. There were so many, and they were trapped, and I should have thought of that. I should have realized the wards would keep everything in, as well as out, when they followed me back, but they were screaming, begging for help, and so I didn't think. Didn't know that they'd cling to the first person who wasn't me. Deku blinks away tears. I did the same thing to the others. They're all mixed up now. I have to find a way to fix it. Deku. Shota nudges the thermos of tea in the boy's hands closer. We can wait. They can wait. You don't have to save the world today. No one in their right mind is going to blame you for what happened. Even if Shota doesn't entirely understand what's happened at all, he knows this much. Humans or spirits, if they do, they can deal with me. Even Tamomo no Mae. Deku takes the world's longest, shaking breath, and smiles up at him lopsidedly. She's saying the same thing. I guess Mizuchi was right, he admits, clutching the thermos to his chest. He said that you were my human guardian, and Ryujin said he'd be my spirit one, if I wanted him to. Shota feels like he's been punched in the chest. He sets his hands on Deku's covered knees, for a moment reminded of a chasm, and a rope and a wooden bridge, and how impossible everything had seemed. Had it really only been 3 weeks? This is too fast, and yet the idea of letting anyone else try to look after Deku is impossible to fathom. Everything has been too fast with this kid, and if he puts it off, who the fuck even knows what's going to happen tomorrow? They can't wait for normal. This is his normal. Well, it sounds like Mizuchi has the right of it, then. He gentles his voice as Deku looks at him quizzically. I'm your guardian. You're my kid, if you want to be. But Deku shakes his head in disbelief. I'm too much trouble. Pretty sure you're exactly the right amount of trouble, Shota tells him, ignoring the way he can hear several of his female students stifling sounds. You can't. Deku ducks his head and drops his voice to a pained whisper. I'm a monster. Well, at least Shota's had to handle that particular train of thought often enough to know how to handle it. Because of what you can do. Deku nods, not meeting his gaze at all. I'm like... All for One is like me. He's a bridge. I can do what he can do. We're the same. He says it like it's a death sentence, tense and balled up. On one hand, it's an incredibly informative few words. Deku thinks All for One is alive. Deku did meet him in some shape or form and learned about him. All for One had some sort of spirit power, and Deku thinks they're the same. Shota already knows the latter isn't true. He's seen Deku work without needing physical contact with someone, for example, and All for One relied on others to teleport him. Similar, certainly, and that wasn't a surprise. They'd considered that already. Same? Hardly. If anything, Shota suspects Deku might be the evolution of whatever the hell All for One was, or was trying to be, at least. Still, the kid doesn't need to hear all of that, when what he means is something far simpler and far easier to combat. No, you're not. I am, Deku protests. Ryujin explained it before Before he died, the only difference is all for one had a spirit, had Ryujin first, and he found out how to shut them out, so he couldn't hear or see them anymore. Oh, really? And that was certainly an interesting piece of the puzzle for later. Seems to me there are a few things you're missing. What? It isn't what you can do with your quirk that makes someone a hero or villain, Deku. It's what you choose to do with it that makes you who you are. You are not a monster because someone similar to you did terrible things, any more than Eri is a monster because of what Overhaul did with her quirk against her will. And I have heard you explain to her exactly why that doesn't make her a monster. So do you want to try to explain to me why you're so different? It's not a quirk, Deku protests, but it's weak and he knows it. I saw what he did, Aizawa. I can't let myself do that to anyone else. So don't. Shota tucks the blankets a little closer around Deku's shoulders. They're still speaking lowly, heads very nearly pressed together. And trust that we won't let you. Remember that you don't have to deal with all this on your own. Not anymore. I promised you I'd help, and I meant it. Not just with school and food and clothes, Deku, but with your powers and your friends. You don't have to run off every time you're afraid. I'm not afraid of you. Deku looks away. I'm not good at asking for help. Shota prods him gently in the chest as he hears Chio arrive at the main door. Good thing you're going to the best school I know of, then, he says, watching as the idea chases some of the darkness out of Deku's gaze. How else are you going to learn? Deku's lower lip wavers, but he doesn't cry. Probably more because of the audience and Chio's presence, if Shota has to guess. The kid looks exhausted. He steps back to let Chio do her best with her mobile kit and her quirk, and is relieved to hear that Deku needs observation just in case, but they don't have to try to take him to emergency unless he shows any new symptoms. Meanwhile, Nezu arrives with Deku's backpack and the stack of prayers Shota knows he'd stashed aside, along with a not subtle amount of other emergency items, just in case he had to leave in a hurry. Shota knows that he can't break Deku of the habit all at once, but they can make a dedicated effort, that if Deku runs, he remembers he can come back. He hands the papers to Sero. My dorm room, one on each wall, one on the door, one on the window, one on the ceiling, one on the floor. Don't have them overlap or touch anything else. Sensei? Sero blinks. I'll explain later. When Deku's up for it, they're going to need to have a long talk with his class. When you're done, do the same thing to the bathroom. Make sure they're somewhere they won't get wet. Tokiyami comes up and nods at Sero. I can show you the best way to place them, he says, formal as ever. He looks at Shota expressionless. I have more should he need them. Shota files that away for later. Thank you. Tokiyami turns Sero towards the dorm rooms, and Shota turns back to Deku, which is a good way of ensuring the rest of his students don't ask what the fuck, at least not quite yet. They get Deku set up in Shota's room once it's warded, propped up on pillows so that he's not horizontal, per Chio's orders. Deku's sound asleep within 5 minutes, still pale and chill, but no longer frighteningly so. I'll sit with him, Hitoshi says from the doorway. I can keep watch, and you have to give everyone else some sort of answer. I think they're going to implode if you make them wait on everything. Shota sighs and nods. Hitoshi pulls up the desk chair and pulls out his phone and slumps into position next to the bed. It's not quite sitting vigil, which Shota finds himself eternally grateful for. He heads down to the shared main space, and, as expected, the majority of his students are waiting for answers while attempting to look like they're not. So, was that really a dragon, Sensei? Ashido asks, leaning over the back of the couch so far he'd worry she'd fall, except if she does, it will be a learning experience. Next to her, Uraraka is poised, nervously tapping her fingers together, but staring Shota down like she can simply glean information straight from his gaze. Shota sighs. This is going to be a long one, and of course, Nezu's still here, seated with Yaoyorozu and drinking tea from her personal tea set that Shota cannot believe she'd willingly risk in this dorm, of all places, acting like this is normal. All right, he says, and suddenly every head is turned to him. I'm only going to explain this once. Very nearly drowning is exhausting, but maybe it's also the bruised ribs and all the magic and the spirits and the knowledge of all for one and one for all and his nightmares that keep sleep from being restful. Izuku dreams about his mother and her gentle spirit, dreams of taking the self as his own and then just stuffing more and more spirits into it until it's a monstrosity that drags itself along at its feet. In some dreams it looks like all for one, oozing legions. In some dreams it looks like one for all, a fusion of parts that accept their whole but forget themselves. He wakes from every vision in a cold sweat. He spends a few days mostly sleeping in his dorm room, with occasional visits from Mirio and Shinso, and of course Aizawa and Eri. The school hums with energy, everyone repairing the storm damage and getting things back in order, and that's all right. He needs time to think, and to process, and to accept that he does want help, and he doesn't want to keep running, and that he believes Aizawa, and the promises he makes. It's still hard, very, very hard, but everything in his life has been hard, and he's never expected it to be easy, not for a long time. And it is easier with friends like Mirio and Shinso, and with support from Aizawa and Hisashi and the other teachers. It's easier when he asks for help from people, not spirits, because, finally, he has people who will say yes. Of course, he has spirits, too. "Your hair is a mess," says Kaze, a sylph so like his mother's spirit she sometimes hurts to look at. She's a dainty slip of a thing, almost transparent, weak after a century of being held, but almost never called upon by all for one. She doesn't have much to offer Izuku, but she still checks on him every morning. "My hair's always a mess," he admits, but he also tries to neaten it up a little bit. Aizawa promised him a haircut this weekend, that he's actually looking forward to. "He's introducing you," she says, fluttering around his head. "Are you sure you don't need more help? There's a lot of spirits in there." Over the last few days, he hasn't been exactly alone. Tamamunome had apologized, holding his hands and shifting between weeping and raging, angry at him for running and apologetic for not telling him about All for One, or Ryujin before. She'd wanted to give him time, she'd said, and he believed her. She'd thought that he was still learning to understand his power and that Ryujin and All for One were too strong. He can at least understand that, even if he can't agree with it. It was so obviously his duty, what he'd been made to fix, and she'd held it back from him. But she'd done so for his sake, and he can't find it in him to be angry about it. It is nice to have someone worry and care. She'd kept him plenty of company after that, but it hadn't been just her. They'd had to take the wards down, in fact, because there was a constant stream of spirits coming to visit him while he recovered. Spirits he'd rescued, spirits who had passed under his hands and he'd freed, spirits he could greet by name, and they did not flinch away from him when he did. It was strange, to not be hated. It still wasn't every spirit. Tamamunome said that she and Mizuchi were spreading the word, along with the others he'd saved, but it would still take time, and not every spirit would want to give him the benefit even now. That was okay. He didn't need every spirit to like him. He didn't need every human to believe him. What he needed was what he had. A family, maybe, but friends for sure. Support, belief from people he cared about, who cared about him, and spirits who would protect him if he needed it. Ryujin, of course, was always just a thought away. "If they don't believe you," he says, as if reading Izuku's mind, "then give Tamamunome power to be physical, and she will teach them a lesson." Izuku has to shake his head. "If it really comes to that, all right, but the point is Aizawa's supposed to teach the lessons, not spirits, and it's better if they can believe what he says after everything else that's happened, I think. Besides, making everyone physical at the hospital was a lot." "A bit too much power with nowhere to go." Ryujin's mental voice shrugs. "That might happen again if you end up overwhelmed. You are different than the first." Good. Izuku doesn't feel so bad these days, when Ryujin compares him to All for One. Ryujin is teaching him, not making comparisons and assuming the worst. It helps. He might not have a bonded spirit that gives him a quirk, but for the first time in his life that doesn't feel like the end of the world. He has a spirit guardian and a human guardian, and they're both going to teach him how to live with who he is and what he can do. And even if he doesn't have a quirk exactly, he has dozens of spirits who have offered him their help. All he has to do is ask. He'd cried a lot the first day he'd spent properly awake, as spirit after spirit came to check on him and give thanks. It means something amazing to be given trust by so many. It means something amazing to not have to bargain and barter for it, giving away pieces of himself every time. For gifts to be given freely, not grudgingly, and to call a dozen new spirits something almost like friends. "Are you coming?" Tama Monome asks, head sticking out of the door. "Kit, did you get lost in your own head again?" Izuku swallows the last of his fear and slides the huge classroom door open and steps inside. "Glad you made it. Worried you were having second thoughts," Aizawa says from behind his podium. Izuku steps up to the space next to Aizawa and surveys the class that he can't exactly say being feverishly adopted in their living room counts as meeting before, but he's seen them. He recognizes them all from the sports festival and the USJ coverage and Nezu's observation lessons. And there's Uraraka, and the ones he'd met in somewhere. Yokohama, he thinks, but the details have the fuzziness he usually associates with memory loss, and he doesn't try to force it. He'll only give himself a headache. Bakugo is glaring daggers at him, but the rest of the class at least have open expressions. Some are blank, a lot are curious, and there's smiles enough to make him feel a little bit at ease. Tama Monome at his back helps a lot to make the various spirits sprawled around the space feel much less intimidating as well. "Hi," he says, his voice a bit of a squeak, still sore from all the coughing he's done. I'm auditing your class before next semester. I mean, Aizawa probably already told you that, but He catches himself before he can ramble, or stutter too badly. As first impressions go, he's not making the best one. "You know me as Deku," he starts again. "And, Aizawa calls me Problem Child." Izuku looks over his shoulder and smiles at his teacher. In his chest, Mizuchi's gift glows warm and bright, and Izuku feels whole. "But my name's actually Izuku. Izuku Midoriya. I can see quirks, and sometimes I can modify them. It's nice to meet you all." He bows, and for once in his life, the tears in his eyes are from happiness, and are all too easy to blink away before anyone else can see them. All right, listeners, this concludes the fic entitled Complicated Creation. I am desperately eager to hear your thoughts and reactions to the way the author wrapped this fic up. I love this one so much. I just thought it was such an incredible fic when I first found it. I just found myself rereading it multiple times, just falling in love with this whole AU the author created for this. So please do let me know your thoughts and reactions. As always, I will encourage you that if you like the fic, if you want to, show support to the original authors, to hop on over to AO3. The links are always in the descriptions for these videos, and to leave comments and kudos to show your support as well. I'm sure authors do appreciate that. And as always, thank you all so much for listening.